Hey everyone, listen up. You won't believe this, Josh announced with a smirk. Our esteemed Mr. Adams here didn't even finish high school. Can you believe it? A high school dropout teaching you guys English for your SATs. Crazy, right? With that, Josh began distributing sheets of paper to the stunned students. The handouts were covered in dense paragraphs of sophisticated English text. Josh, a Harvard graduate, had always looked down on Ken for his lack of formal education. Ken had been teaching English at the tutoring center, helping students prepare for their SATs and other standardized tests. Now, Josh was presenting an extremely challenging English passage, demanding an immediate translation. His intent was clear: to humiliate Ken in front of the students. Look, this isn't really relevant to our lesson plan, Ken began, trying to redirect the class. Come on, Mr. Adams. Don't try to weasel out of this. Josh cut him off. You're always going on about how formal education doesn't matter, right? Well, I think it does. It shows just how capable a person really is. If you truly believe credentials don't matter, then prove it. Show us what a high school dropout can do with this college-level English. This isn't appropriate, Ken tried again. What's the matter? Can't do it? Josh taunted. Can't handle this. Maybe you shouldn't be teaching here at all. It's not fair to the students or to us. The students watched the exchange with a mixture of confusion and discomfort. Though the challenge was completely unrelated to the planned lesson, Ken realized he had no choice but to comply. He took a deep breath, steeling himself over what he was about to do. As Ken began to speak, he noticed Josh's face gradually losing its color. My name is Ken Adams, and I'll be turning 30 next month. It's been quite a journey to get where I am today, and I never imagined I'd be standing in front of a classroom helping students prepare for their SATs and college admissions. For many years, I was occupied with taking care of my grandparents. They had raised me while my parents worked long hours, and when they fell ill, I felt it was my duty to return the favor. It was during this time that I found myself drawn back to the world of education, albeit in an unexpected way. I started working at Excellence Prep, a tutoring center that primarily caters to middle and high school students. The center offers a wide range of programs, from basic courses that supplement regular school curricula to intensive test prep for various standardized tests like the SAT, ACT, and AP exams. Excellence Prep isn't your typical mom and pop tutoring setup. While many centers focus on either one-on-one instruction or small group classes, we offer a hybrid model. Students can choose from a variety of subject-specific classes and supplement them with individual sessions as needed. We've even expanded into online tutoring, making us one of the larger and more comprehensive tutoring services in the area. As summer began to wind down and the first hints of fall crept into the air, the atmosphere at Excellence Prep started to shift. The next round of SATs and college application deadlines looming on the horizon, we found ourselves in planning mode, strategizing how best to prepare our students for the challenge ahead. Like every other test prep center in the country, we were caught up in the annual frenzy of college admissions season. The air was thick with a mix of excitement and anxiety, both from the students and the staff. Today, we were scheduled for an all-hands meeting to discuss our game plan for the upcoming months. It's always a crucial time for us, as our reputation largely hinges on how well our students perform on their standardized tests and college applications. The area where our center is located has seen a boom in new housing developments over the past few years, resulting in a significant increase in the number of school-aged children. This demographic shift has been great for business, but it also means we have our work cut out for us. With so many students gunning for our top scores in dream schools, we need to be more strategic than ever. We spend a lot of time analyzing trends in the test questions, tracking changes in college admission criteria, and fine-tuning our teaching methods to give our students the best possible advantage. As we settled into the conference room before our meeting, I couldn't help but feel a little out of my depth. Despite having been back at Excellent Prep for a while now, I was still playing catch-up when it came to the ever-changing landscape of college admissions. The discussions quickly turned to target schools, which colleges were trending this year, which ones had become more competitive, and which might be good safety options for our students. My colleagues rattled off names of schools and their latest admission statistics with ease, while I struggled to keep up. Most of these schools were within a reasonable distance, no more than an hour's drive or so, and were familiar names to everyone in the room. Well, almost everyone. I found myself nodding along, trying not to let on how little I knew about the current college scene. As I was jotting down notes, trying to make a sense of all the information being thrown around, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Josh, one of our newer instructors who had joined the team about a year ago.
"Hey, Ken," he whispered, leaning in close. "You've been in this area your whole life, right? Did you go to a different high school or something? Yeah, I don't think I ever heard you mention where you went."
I froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. It was an innocent enough question, but one I've been dreading since I started working here again. I took a deep breath and decided to be honest. Actually, I never took the SAT. I admitted with a sheepish smile. I didn't go through the traditional high school experience here. Josh's eyes widened with curiosity. He looked like he was about to ask for more details, but thankfully, the meeting facilitator called for our attention, saving me from further explanation. I could feel Josh's eyes on me for the rest of the meeting, and I knew this wouldn't be the end of it. I was right. As soon as the meeting wrapped up, Josh cornered me again. This time, he didn't bother to lower his voice.
"Wait, Ken, did I hear that right? You never took the SAT? So what? You're a high school dropout or something?"
I could feel the eyes of several other colleagues turn towards us. My cheeks burned as I fumbled for a response. It's complicated, I managed to say. I didn't drop out exactly, but... Before I could finish my explanation, Josh's face lit up with a mix of surprise and one looked disturbingly like Lee.
"Oh man, that's wild!"
he exclaimed, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear.
"Guys, did you know about this? Ken here is teaching SAT prep, and he never even took the test himself."
I wanted to sink into the floor. This was exactly the kind of attention I'd been hoping to avoid. But Josh wasn't done.
"That's crazy, man. I mean, no offense, but how did you even get this job? I had to show my Harvard transcript just to get an interview here."
Ah, yes, Harvard. Josh never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of his Ivy League pedigree. He made quite a name for himself since joining Excellence Prep, boasting about his perfect SAT score and the number of students he'd helped get into top-tier schools. To be fair, Josh was good at what he did. His classes were always full, and parents specifically requested him for their kids. But his attitude, well, that was another story. I tried to deflect, to change the subject, but Josh was like a dog with a bone. He peppered me with questions about my education, each one making me more uncomfortable than the last. Finally, I managed to excuse myself, claiming I had to prepare for my next class. As I hurried away, I could hear Josh regaling our colleagues with theories about how I must have conned my way into this job. The next few weeks were uncomfortable, to say the least. Josh seemed to have made it his personal mission to expose what he saw as my lack of qualifications. He'd make little comments in staff meetings, questioning my input on curriculum decisions or test prep strategies.
"Are you sure about that, Ken?"
he'd say with a smirk.
"Yeah, I mean, you haven't actually been through this process yourself, have you?"
I tried to brush it off, to focus on my work and my students. After all, I knew I was good at my job. My students' test scores spoke for themselves, but Josh's constant needling was starting to wear me down. Things came to a head one afternoon when I was scheduled to teach an SAT prep class. As I walked into the classroom, I was surprised to see Josh already there, chatting with the students.
"Oh, Ken,"
he said with fake enthusiasm.
"I hope you don't mind, but I thought I'd sit in on your class today. You know, just to observe and maybe offer some pointers."
I knew this wasn't standard procedure, but I didn't want to make a scene in front of the students, so I nodded stiffly and began my lesson. It was excruciating. Every time I explained a concept or worked through a practice question, I could feel Josh's eyes on me, and almost hear the critical thoughts running around his head. He'd occasionally interject with a clarification or an additional point, effectively undermining my authority in the classroom. By the end of the class, I was a bundle of nerves. As the students filed out, Josh approached me with that same smug smile.
Not bad, Ken.
He said, his tone dripping with condescension.
But there are some more advanced strategies you could be teaching these kids. Things you know if you'd actually gone through the process yourself. Maybe you should sit on one of my classes sometime. Pick up some pointers.
I was speechless. The audacity of this guy was unbelievable. But before I could formulate a response, he was gone, leaving me alone in the classroom, seething with frustration. That night, as I tried to unwind from the stressful day, I found myself reflecting on my unconventional path to this career. It was true that I hadn't gone through the traditional American high school experience. I hadn't stressed over the SAT like most of my students were doing now. But that didn't mean I wasn't qualified to teach them. My mind wandered back to my time in the States, to the challenges I'd faced and overcome. I thought about the intensive English immersion I'd experienced, the late nights spent poring over textbooks, determined to not just catch up, but to excel in my new environment. I remember the culture shock, the loneliness of being the only Japanese student in my classes, how I'd thrown myself into my studies, using academic success as a lifeline in a world that often felt alien and overwhelming. And then, just as I was finding my footing, came the news about my grandparents' health. The difficult decision to return to Japan, to put my budding career on hold to care for the people who had cared for me. Those years of caregiving had been challenging in ways I never could have imagined. The physical toll of helping my aging grandparents with their daily needs. The emotional strain of watching the people who had once seemed larger than life become frail and dependent. Constant juggling act of balancing their care with my own need to earn a living. I thought about the skills I developed during that time. Patience, empathy, the ability to explain complex concepts in simple terms. Skills that, I realized, served me well in my current role as a teacher. Yes, my path has been unconventional, but it also gave me a unique perspective, one that allowed me to connect with my students in ways that someone like Josh, with a straightforward path from high school to Harvard, might not be able to. Those thoughts swirling in my mind, I made a decision. I wouldn't let Josh's bullying tactics get to me anymore. I knew my worth, knew what I had to offer my students, and tomorrow, I go into work with my head held high, ready to face whatever Josh might throw in my way. Little did I know, the very next day would bring a confrontation that would change everything. I arrived at excellent prep the next morning, steeling myself for another day of Josh's snide comments and undermining behavior. But as I walked into the staff room, I was met with an unusual scene. Josh was there, surrounded by a group of our colleagues, waving a sheet of paper and talking animatedly. As I approached, I caught snippets of their conversation.
Can you believe it? The perfect score!
That's incredible, Josh!
How'd you do it?
Josh's face was alight with pride as he regaled our co-workers with the tale of his latest tutoring triumph. Apparently, one of his students had just received a perfect 1600 in the SAT.
It's all about the strategies,
Josh was saying.
You've got to know how to game the system. That's what I teach my students. That's what they succeed.
I tried to slip past unnoticed, but of course, Josh spotted me.
Ah, Ken!
He called out, his voice dripping with false camaraderie.
Come here. You gotta see this. This is what real SAT prep looks like.
Reluctantly, I joined the group. Josh thrust a score report in my face, grinning triumphantly.
See that? 1600. Perfect score. That's what happens when you have someone who actually knows what they're doing teaching these kids.
I felt my face grow hot, a mixture of embarrassment and anger bubbling up inside me. But before I could respond, Josh continued.
You know, Ken, I've been thinking, maybe we should reassign some of your students to me. I mean, it's not fair to them, is it? Having someone who's never even taken the SAT trying to prepare them for it?
That was the last straw. Weeks of pent-up frustration came pouring out. Look, Josh, I said, my voice low but firm. I may not have taken the SAT, but that doesn't mean I can't teach it. My students' scores speak for themselves. Josh scoffed.
Please, your students do okay, sure, but okay isn't good enough in this business. These kids need every advantage they can get.
And you think you're the only one who can give them that advantage? I shot back.
Well, let's face it.
Josh smirked.
Harvard trumps no high school diploma any day of the week.
Our colleagues were watching this exchange with a mix of discomfort and fascination. I knew I should walk away, should be the bigger person, but something in me snapped. Fine, I said, surprising even myself. You want to prove you're better? Let's do it, right now. Josh's eyebrows shot up.
What are you talking about?
You and me, an SAT challenge, right here, right now. Unless you're afraid to put your money where your mouth is. A hush fell over the room. Josh looked taken aback for a moment, but quickly recovered his composure.
You're on,
he said, a predatory grin spreading across his face.
But let's make it interesting. Winner takes the other classes for the rest of the semester. Deal?
I hesitated for a moment. This was a huge risk. If I lost, I'll be out of a job. But the thought of wiping that smug grin off Josh's face. Deal, I said, extending my hand. Josh shook it, then turned to our stunned colleagues.
Who wants to judge this little contest?
Our center director, Sarah, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of concern and curiosity, stepped forward. I'll do it, she said. But this stays between us. I don't want the students or their parents getting wind of this competition. We agreed, and Sarah quickly set about arranging the challenge. She disappeared into her office and returned with a sealed envelope. This, she explained, contains an unreleased SAT practice test. Neither of you have seen these questions before. You'll each take the test under standard time conditions. Whoever scores highest wins. Simple as that. Josh and I nodded our agreement. Sarah led us to an empty classroom, sat 2 desks apart from each other, and handed us each a test booklet and answer sheet. You have 3 hours and 15 minutes, she said, setting a timer. Begin now. The next 3 hours were a blur of reading passages, math problems, and essay writing. Felt like I was back in school, sweating over a high-stakes exam. But as I worked through the questions, I found a strange calm settling over me. This is what I did every day, what I helped my students prepare for. I knew this material inside and out, and more importantly, I knew how to approach it, but I think critically and analytically about each question. As I bubbled in for my final answer and set down my pencil, I felt a surge of confidence. I looked over at Josh, who was still scribbling furiously, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. When time was called, we both handed our materials to Sarah. She disappeared to grade our tests, leaving Josh and me to wait in tense silence. It felt like hours before Sarah returned, her face unreadable. She looked between us, then took a deep breath. Well, gentlemen, I have to say this was unexpected, she began. Ken, your score was 1580 out of 1600. Josh, yours was 1540. The room fell silent. I blinked, certain I had misheard. Then I saw Josh's face, a mix of disbelief and anger, and I knew it was true.
That's impossible,
Josh sputtered.
He didn't even go to high school here. How could he?
Sarah held up a hand to silence him. The results speak for themselves, Josh. Ken outscored you fair and square. I stood there, stunned. I had won. I had actually beaten Josh at his own game. But my victory was short-lived. Josh's face contorted with fury, and he turned on me.
This is ridiculous,
he shouted.
He must have cheated somehow. There is no way a high school dropout could score higher than me on the SAT.
His words hung in the air, echoing in the sudden silence that followed. I saw Sarah's eyes widen, and I knew that my secret was out. Ken? Sarah said slowly. Is this true? Are you a high school dropout? I took a deep breath. It was time for the truth to come out. Not exactly, I began. It's true that I didn't graduate from an American high school, but that's because I moved to the States after finishing middle school in Japan. I went on to explain my unconventional educational journey, how I had been placed in advanced classes upon arrival in the US, how I had worked tirelessly to overcome the language barrier and cultural differences, and how I had ultimately graduated from an American university at the age of 18. I never took the SAT, I admitted, because I didn't need to. My academic performance and language proficiency were enough to secure my college admission. As I spoke, I saw the expressions on my colleagues' faces change from shock to amazement. Even Josh seemed too stunned to interrupt. After graduation, I returned to Japan to care for my grandparents, I continued. That's when I started tutoring to make ends meet. I discovered I had a knack for breaking down complex concepts and explaining them in ways that students could understand. When I came back to the States, I brought those skills with me. I turned to Sarah, who was listening intently. I know my background was unconventional, and I apologize for not being fully transparent about it, but I hope my performance today and the success of my students speak to my qualifications as a tutor. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Ken, I appreciate your honesty, and I have to say, your results, both today and with your students, are impressive. I think we need to have a longer conversation about this, but for now, I believe you've more than proven your capability. She turned to Josh, who was still standing there, mouth agape. Josh, I think you owe Ken an apology. Your behavior over the past week has been unprofessional and borderline harassment. We'll be discussing this further in private. Josh looked like he wanted to argue, but deflated under Sarah's stern gaze. He mumbled something that might have been an apology and quickly left the room. As word of what happened spread through the tutoring center, I found myself the center of attention. Colleagues who had previously kept their distance now approached me with questions about my background and teaching methods. Students whispered excitedly when I walked by, and I overheard more than one say they wanted to switch to my class. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Sarah and I had several long conversations about my background and my future at Excellence Prep. To my relief, she was more impressed than angry about my unconventional path. She even suggested that my unique experience could be an asset in connecting with students who might be struggling with their own challenges. Josh, on the other hand, seemed to shrink into himself. He stopped his boasting and avoided me in the hallways. I heard through the grapevine that he had been put on probation and was required to attend sensitivity training. As for me, I threw myself into my work with renewed energy. I developed new strategies for explaining difficult concepts. Drawing on my own experience of learning English as a second language, I started a support group for international students preparing for standardized tests, helping them navigate not just the academic challenges, but the cultural ones as well. To my surprise, I found myself becoming something of a mentor to my fellow tutors. They came to me for advice on how to connect with struggling students, or how to explain particularly tricky concepts. It was a role I never expected to find myself in, but one I found deeply satisfying. One day, about a month after the SAT showdown, as it had come to be known, I was preparing for my afternoon class when there was a knock on my office door. To my surprise, it was Josh. He looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot as he stood in the doorway.
Can I come in?
He asked hesitantly. I nodded, curious about what he could want. Josh sat down across from me, his usual confidence nowhere to be seen. He was quiet for a moment, then took a deep breath.
I owe you an apology,
he said, looking me in the eye for the first time in weeks.
A real one this time. The way I treated you, it was wrong. I was arrogant and judgmental, and I'm sorry.
I was taken aback by his sincerity. Thank you, Josh. I appreciate that. He nodded, then continued.
The thing is, I've been doing a lot of thinking since that day about why I acted the way I did, why I felt the need to put you down.
Josh paused, seeming to gather his thoughts.
You know, I always prided myself on my Harvard degree, on my perfect SAT score. I thought they made me special, better than everyone else. But watching you ace that test, hearing about your journey, it made me realize how narrow my view of success had been.
I listened quietly, sensing that Josh needed to get this off his chest.
The truth is,
he continued,
I was intimidated by you, by how easily you connected with the students, how you could break down complex ideas in a way I never thought of. And I told myself it was because I was smarter, better educated, but really, I was just insecure.
Josh looked down at his hands.
My parents, they were both high school dropouts. They worked so hard to give me opportunities they never had. And I guess I internalized this idea that education was everything. That without the right degrees, you couldn't possibly succeed. Seeing you challenge that belief, it shook me.
I was stunned by Josh's vulnerability. This was a side of him I had never seen before. Josh, I said gently, thank you for sharing that with me. I can't imagine how difficult it must have been for you, feeling that pressure to succeed. He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth.
Yeah, well, I didn't handle it very well, did I? But I'm trying to do better. I've been talking to a therapist, trying to work through some of these issues.
That's great, Josh, I said sincerely. It takes a lot of courage to confront those kind of deep-seated beliefs. We talked for a while longer, sharing our stories about our backgrounds and our journeys to becoming educators. As we spoke, I felt the last of the tension between us dissipate, replaced by a newfound understanding and respect. Before he left, Josh turned to me one last time.
Ken, I was wondering, would you be willing to observe one of my classes sometime? Give me some pointers? I've seen how you teach, and I think I could learn a lot from you.
I smiled, touched by his humility. I'd be honored, Josh. And maybe you could sit in one of mine too. I'm sure there's plenty I could learn from you as well. As Josh left my office, I felt a sense of closure, but also of new beginnings. Our conversation had reminded me of why I became a teacher in the first place. Not just to help students ace the test, but to help them grow as individuals, to challenge their assumptions and broaden their horizons. In the weeks that followed, Josh and I began to collaborate on new teaching strategies. We combined his deep knowledge of test-taking techniques with my experience of breaking down language barriers and explaining concepts in multiple ways. Together, we developed a comprehensive approach that addressed not just the academic aspects of test prep, but also the psychological and emotional challenges our students faced. Our new methods were a hit with the students. We saw improvements not just in test scores, but in overall confidence and engagement. Students who had been struggling began to flourish, and those who were already doing well pushed themselves to new heights. Word of our success spread, and soon Excellence Prep was being recognized as one of the most innovative and effective test prep centers in the area. Sarah, our center director, was thrilled with the positive changes and encouraged us to document our methods for use in other branches of the company. As for me, I found a new sense of purpose in my work. I no longer felt the need to hide my unconventional background. Instead, I embraced it, using my unique experiences to connect with students and help them see their own potential. One day, I was wrapping up a particularly successful SAT prep class. A student approached me with a question I've heard many times before, but now felt entirely different about answering. "Mr. Adams?" she asked hesitantly. "Is it true that you never took the SAT yourself? How did you get so good at teaching it?" I smiled, remembering how the same question had once filled me with dread. Now, I saw it as an opportunity to share an important lesson. "That's right," I said. "I didn't take the traditional path that most of you are on, but that doesn't mean I can't understand what you're going through or help you succeed." I paused, looking around at the curious faces of my students. You see, education isn't just about tests or degrees. It's about learning how to think, how to approach challenges, how to adapt to new situations. Those are skills you can develop in many different ways. The students listened intently as I shared a bit of my journey, my move to the United States, the challenges I faced, and how I overcame them. "The most important thing I learned," I concluded, "is that your worth isn't determined by test score or diploma. It's about what you do with the knowledge you gain, how you use it to grow as a person, and contribute to the world around you." As the students filed out of the classroom, I saw thoughtful expressions on many of their faces. I hoped that my words had given them a new perspective, one that looked beyond the pressure of test scores and college admissions. Later that day, as I was packing up to head home, Josh stopped by my classroom.
"Hey, Ken,"
he said with a grin.
"I heard you giving that little speech to your students earlier. Pretty inspiring stuff."
I chuckled. "Thanks, Josh. I hope it didn't sound too cheesy." He shook his head.
"Not at all. In fact, you got me thinking. You know, we spend so much time focusing on getting these kids into top colleges, but maybe we should be doing more to prepare them for life beyond that."
I nodded, intrigued. "What did you have in mind?" Josh's eyes lit up with excitement.
"Well, what if we developed a program that combines test prep with life skills training? You know, things like critical thinking, adaptability, emotional intelligence, skills that will serve them well no matter where they end up."
I felt a smile spreading across my face. "Josh, it's a brilliant idea. It could really set us apart from other test prep centers." We spent the next hour brainstorming ideas for this new program, our enthusiasm growing with each passing minute. As we talked, I realized how far we'd come, from rivals to collaborators, working together to make a real difference in our students' lives. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. From a young boy in Japan, to a foreign student in America, to a caregiver for my grandparents, and now to a teacher helping shape young minds. Each experience, each challenge, had contributed to who I was and the work I was now doing. I thought about Josh, and how our conflict had ultimately led to growth for both of us. Thought about my students, and the potential they each held to make their own unique mark on the world. And I realized that in the end, it wasn't about SAT scores or Ivy League degrees. It was about the connections we make, the lessons we learn from each other, and the positive impact we can have on the world around us. That, I decided, was the true measure of success. As I pulled into my driveway, I felt a sense of excitement for what the future held. Not just for me, for all the students whose lives I had the privilege of touching. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to learn and grow, and I was ready to face them, armed with the wisdom of my experiences and the knowledge that every setback was just another chance to rise above.